Hello. There we go. All right, hey guys. So just to be responsible for the event here, I just want to be starting on time. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to kind of trickle in. There's a good amount of people still in the hallway. But I just want to very, very quickly introduce Dr. Todd Loushine, Dr. Matt Law. They're going to be the ones who are going to be doing this breakout session. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, Dr. Todd Loushine, certified safety professional and has a PhD. He is from Wisconsin, so also where I hail from. Go Wisconsin. He is an assistant professor and environmental health and safety specialist and self-described data analytics expert. He is a former compliance safety and health officer where he learned about occupational safety and health from an OSHA perspective. He attended graduate school from the University of Wisconsin-Madison while also working as a risk manager at the Wisconsin Department of Health and Family Services. He is currently teaching as an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Mr. Matt Law is a certified safety professional who earned a doctorate of public health degree from Walden University. It is based upon his dissertation and doctoral studies of occupational risk perceptions among foreign-born construction workers in Central Florida. If you guys have not read that, that is actually a really, really interesting read. Just because, hey, you know, where I'm from, based upon my skin color, I have preconceived notions on how to do certain things, and Dr. Matt Law here spent a good amount of time kind of exploring a different perspective of what we got going on here in Central Florida. So he works from a management team for Grainger as a business strategist for safety solutions using academic research, market intelligence, and end-user data to develop comprehensive approaches to mitigate risks to people and property and the environment. He is a certified safety professional, like I mentioned, and a registered environmental health and safety specialist. So with that being said, I just want to take a quick moment. Dr. Matt Law has a podcast. Mr. Matt, do you mind talking about your podcast real quick, and then we'll jump into it?
Okay. Well, so I do have a podcast. It's called Prove It To Me. We actually have a slide. We'll talk about it here in a little bit. But the first full-length episode was actually me and Dr. Todd here talking about exactly what we're talking about today. So it's kind of a cathartic process for me creating that podcast. It's really just a way to explore research in health and safety and workplace environment, and also just daily life, nutrition and health and wellness. So it's a lot of cool stuff. There's some really interesting episodes that I've had lately where there are studies that do exist and studies that don't exist and studies that really tell us some things that challenge our assumptions. So it's a really, really fun, interesting podcast, I think. I don't know, I'm the creator, so biased.
So with that being said, guys, again, I do want to appreciate the time and opportunity you guys are giving these folks. So please, and correct me if I'm wrong, this will be slightly interactive. Okay, if not, please yell at me, I'm sorry. But with that being said, guys, please welcome Dr. Todd and Dr. Matt Law. Thank you, guys.
Oh, yes, I should let everybody know that this session is being recorded for the podcast, so you'll be able to listen to it later, just in case you space out now. But it's also a way to get the listeners to kind of hear what we have to say again from a little bit of a different perspective.
So Kelton was very kind in his review of our bio. If somebody has a heart attack, please call 911. We're not that type of doctors. And I always just go by Todd, so just call me Todd. This is slightly different than what the program has for a title. We had been going back and forth with Tim, and we decided, you know, you've got another session coming up next on leading indicators or on data. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it, but what we decided to do is attempt to catch lightning in a bottle, I guess, and talk about the same things we kind of talked about in that original, but we're going to make it more towards a group discussion versus just a two-person discussion. So we will be talking a little bit about the setup for scientific approach to things, but a majority of the slides are dedicated to metrics. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between correlation and causation, speak to basically would be our gut, hey, I think this is how it's working. And then at the end, Matt's going to lead a transformative exercise. But before we begin, we've been talking about his thing. The reason that Matt put together his podcast is something that I've felt and known for 20, 25 years, but didn't have the cojones to do it myself. And so I just want to give him props for putting this podcast together and start really talking about what is actual research versus basically what I have here up in the top. I'm going to do my own research and then putting in the search, this is what I already know. And when somebody says, do your research, and they say, just Google something, that's not research. By definition, it's not. You're just looking something up. That's all it is. You're trying to find an answer. I'll go over this and I'll give it over to Matt. So the scientific method is there, but really it's not, it's cyclical, yes, but it's never a straight line. It's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Unfortunately, sometimes it's 3 steps back, and you got to redo it. And sometimes you put in days, hours, months, and then have nothing to show for it. Anybody here go through doctoral training? I mean, the 2 things they tell us when we go in for our original proposal of the problem is 1, don't cry. 2, don't run out of the room crying, because your mentor team, when they see blood in the water, they're like sharks. I got through my first one, though I was very nervous. The whole idea is just basically seeking the truth or seeking understanding. And what is truth? You may be thinking to yourself right now, truth is what I say it is, or how I perceive it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to show you different examples and put you through some exercises so that you can conceive, hopefully by the end of this, that, maybe what I think, or the reason I think things are going a certain way, or the reason why something that I'm trying to put into place isn't working the way I thought I should, isn't what I think it is. In which case, you have a much better chance of measuring its performance and then coming up with a better solution. If you're going to go to graduate school, and if anybody wants to talk about that at the end, I can. What you don't know, you don't know. You guys ever think about that? That is graduate school right there. Because I showed up to graduate school with 7 years under my belt, and I thought I knew everything. Professor would ask a question, here's the answer. Where did you get that? I just know it. No, not good enough. So I basically had to sort of relearn or augment the way I practice, but to a better extent. I think I'm much more successful in my practice now. Construct validity. Basically, we're getting into some terminology here. If somebody goes, well, if I do this, I'm going to get that, and it doesn't make sense, that's construct validity. It's basically, does one variable relate to or cause another? And when we say variable, it could be, what did Emily talk about today? How a person's feeling, the environment they're in, all these things. But what we found in our studies and in our development, that A doesn't always equal B. Sometimes A causes C, which causes B. And if you're only measuring A to B, you're completely misunderstanding the relationship between those 2 variables. Measure reliability is what we're going to talk about when it comes to injuries. Is injury the right measure? What does an injury mean? What are we learning from it? And we'll get into that. Unbiased assessment, we all come to the field with bias. You can't help it. The senses we get through our eyes, ears, nose, touch, balance, all that stuff, I think I didn't say smell. Smell gives us some information, but our brains are wired for simplicity. Our brains are wired to find patterns in the world, to try to make sense of it. It will connect dots that shouldn't be connected, just for the ease of understanding. When we know that, then when we design a study, we have to let the study speak for itself. And then you should just be reviewing or speaking to refereed or reviewed publications. A lot of people don't understand what it goes through as far as what you're basically doing is you're doing some work, you write it up, call it a manuscript, and you have other experts review it. And they apply their background to it to understand, did you set it up right? Did you run it right? Did you analyze it right? Did you make unbiased interpretation of your results? You have experts doing that. Today we've got a lot of what I would consider monthly magazines, in which people have great credentials and they're publishing really interesting stuff, but it doesn't go through the same rigor as something that's published in a journal that nobody here has access to and only a few of us read. So there's an enormous disconnect between the researchers and the practitioners right now, and it's something that's very uncomfortable to me.
So I think from my perspective, one of the biggest takeaways from this presentation is just to be more curious and to open up your curiosity about things. So all of us carry some form of bias, and you'll talk about, or in research, bias comes up all the time. It could be a personal bias, it could be a response bias in the way people that, respond to different surveys or different factors that are out there, but it's just to be curious. And we all carry these preconceived notions and assumptions about things, but if you're presented with an idea or you find something in measuring something that goes against what you thought was actually true, don't just dismiss it, be curious about it. And the same, it goes the other way too. If you're presented with something that does align with what you think is true, don't just immediately accept it, be curious about it. We have to get in this mindset of experimentation and measuring and testing and controlling things. We have to be able to figure out what really works. One of the main challenges in the safety and health world right now is that we still have not come to a consensus on the right way to do safety. And there's all these big ideas out there that are BBS and HOP and Safety 1 and Safety 2 and SIFs and all these different ideas, and very few of them have any kind of evidence or measurement to go along with them. But what I'm saying is that's not necessarily a problem, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to be curious about it and go out and test it and measure it and figure out exactly what's going on here so that we can move forward.
So this slide builds off of what he had just said. What is the truth? And so I've got 2 questions up here that I want you to think about but don't reply to. We could do an entire couple-hour workshop on what is safety, because I think a lot of us have similar concepts of it, but when you really get down to trying to explain it to your family, it maybe comes out a little bit differently. The second is, how do you measure it? If you can't measure it, how can you establish it's working, really? So we need more introspective curiosity. He brought up the word introspective. A couple years ago, I took on a second job, in addition to being a professor. I was an EHS manager for a company in Madison. They needed help. I had a little bit extra time, so I gave them the time. And it allowed me to basically test everything I teach. Some things worked, some things not as much. It also gave me real-world examples of what I could bring into the classroom. So my teaching ability, the depth of my topics greatly changed. Now, everything is very much hands-on, very much practical. I got stories to go along with it. I kept a very detailed journal daily of what I was doing, who I was meeting, ideas I had, and then I would review it each week and kind of summarize and build off of that. And so when I tell my students you should be keeping a journal and doing reflective thinking, reflective journaling is how we improve as humans. It really is. I'm from the 90s. Anybody hear of the Franklin Planner? Okay, that's where it started. I was forced to do that for work, and I found I could get more done. And then when I had to report to my supervisor what I've been up to, I didn't have to be, I'm a procrastinator. I don't know if you guys are too. I wait until they tell me, what have you been doing? Then I can look back at my notes and figure it out versus sit there and make stuff up. Yeah. Matt had talked about consensus and then the whole idea of measuring, testing, trying something, and then improving from it, which is the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, Deming. I'll bring up a picture of Deming and a great quote in a little bit. The first lesson. So everybody pull out their graphing calculators. Let's go. Here's what I'm going to teach you. So I had to take, I dare say, 4 semester courses in different types of statistical methods. And I reflected on it a lot. And I would have to collect data and analyze it. And here's what I found out. That the equations, and I kept it simple. This is just variance. You heard Emily bring up the term of variance before too. It's the amount something changes. If you're looking at how something relates to somebody else, you see how it changes over a particular scale, right? Let's get back to it, shall we? The bell curve, you're probably thinking, oh, he's going to curve the exam, right? But here's the idea. Most population data fits sort of a normal or a bell curve. The basic idea is that the mean, the median, the mode are all right in the center, so it's the most frequent measure, and then as you tail away, we can calculate based on how many numbers or frequency are in here, we get a standard deviation. And you can see here that the standard deviation is basically the square of the variance, I believe is what it is. You're thinking, why do we have to know this stuff? Because almost all parametric statistical methods require the population data to fit this basic model. If the data doesn't fit this model, we can, so what they're basically saying is there's some skewness or kurtosis to your data set, especially when you have a sample variance, that you can still run it. It's going to be a little bit off, and maybe you have to run non-parametrics on it, but it's still somewhat valid. I contend injury data or incident data is asymptotic, which means there is no normality to it. Therefore, anything beyond descriptive statistics should not be reported. And what I really mean by that is we've got the Bureau of Labor Statistics here. You guys have seen these curves before, yes? This is from their SOI report. These are all the different classifications of incidence rates, or incident rate, however you want to call it. Does everybody assume that's the average? I mean, we do. No, just say, yeah, we do, because that's what we're told to do. I've looked on National Safety Council, National Safety Council, ASSP, Board of Certified Safety Professionals. They show you how to calculate an incidence rate, total case, severity, DART, lost workday, and compare it to your industry peers, right? But don't we then assume that this is the average? I mean, even OSHA. OSHA says, you know, in order to get VPP, you have to have 3 years of DART below your industry average. Average means nothing when you have extreme outliers, you're not including the zeros. And that's how they're doing it. But they don't tell us that. They worry about, oh, people are underreporting. Sure, maybe, but I published a paper last year that showed that that's not our biggest concern, that it's actually the hours worked in the calculation of the incidence rates that's driving things way off. Anything to add? they're like, turn, we don't want to know anymore about that.
So just to expand on this a little bit and just to sort of corral us in a little bit, I have to say that this is, what we're doing is challenging that the way we measure things right now. And what we're not saying is stop what you're doing and do something else, because obviously there is an industry standard here, and there are things that we have to report and we have to measure for various different reasons, right? Whether it be for OSHA recordable reasons or for insurance reasons or whatever it may be, what we're doing is we are challenging what those measurements actually mean and how to think about them. It's not an end-all be-all. It is something that's necessary for an industry standard, but when we're actually talking about ways to improve and make things better for workplace safety and health, this is not necessarily the answer because of all the issues that Todd's talking about.
Yeah, what I came up with in grad school when I started working on this stuff is, can you judge my driving performance based on the number of accidents I get in? Can I judge the performance of your safety program based on the number of injuries that occur? I think it's something else. I really do. I think it's unfair. And here's the other thing, too. I think it's Druck who had said what gets measured gets managed. Are we managing what gets recorded? Are we managing our calculations, or are we managing what's going on out in the field? Okay, so I love this one. This is a huge topic of debate on LinkedIn, at least anyway. You guys know Heinrich's pyramid, right? Everybody's like, oh, it's BS, right? Well, I took Heinrich's pyramid. I bought the book, the 1953 version, for $4. It's my most prized possession. It cost more to ship it to me. This was in grad school. So I took his pyramid, I kicked it on its side, I turned it into a distribution, because that's what he should have done. He made a mistake by putting it in a pyramid. This does not say that they are related. If you turn the page after, it's not the right page right away after the pyramid, it's the one after that. He talks about, I'm not saying these things are related. He's saying that some incidents actually will result in fatality before it would ever be a near miss or anything that's low. He says that. All he's trying to demonstrate is that there's value in trying to understand the incident that resulted in near miss or good catch or observation or first aid. And those happen on a much more frequent basis. That's all he's really saying. So when we look at it here, was he way off? Well, Bird replicated it, Mosaic, and ConocoPhillips. I'm seeing the same curve, you guys, or I'll say the same trend. That's a better way to say it. I'm seeing the same trend. Best represented by the curve called asymptotic. Okay? Lots and lots, very few. Lots and lots, very few. So when I worked that part-time job, they had been using these metrics for the performance of the safety program. I said, okay, I will continue to measure those, but I want to know how many first aid cases have been happening. I want to count the near misses. I want the worker observations, and I'm going to track the corrective actions I make, and I'll compare it back as a ratio to what you have here. Here's what we found. On a monthly basis, I may have one recordable, and I may have like 50 near miss, first aid observations. Am I creating a better, safe environment by considering 50 observations or one? One. Well, I was going to say one. No, it's the 50. The more information you have. Here's the other thing I'll say. I have 50 opportunities for touch points with workers. Every time there was an injury, I came up with contrition. I'm sorry this happened to you. What can we do? To try to get rid of the idea that they're intimidated and I'm going to blame them. The other is, what it did is it proliferated more discussion. I could walk around, and I did a lot. I'd have 3 people stop me at each cycle around. That's a lot. And they would come to me in the office and talk about things. I created a new system to record that stuff. I showed management that when workers are able to talk, ask questions about safety, report things, and then I respond to them immediately, we're able to drive down all that lagging stuff. But it wasn't the lagging stuff anymore. It's the feeling that was built. It proliferated to engineering, to supervision, to maintenance. And I didn't have measures for that, but I knew. Do you want to add to this?
And sort of the danger of thinking that one of these things would relate to the others is that so we talked about variance, and you'll hear variance used in a few different ways, but there are many, if you've ever done an incident investigation for especially a severe injury or fatality, you know that there are many things that go into that. And each one of those causes a certain amount of variance or what they contribute to that situation happening. And the best example I can give right now, because I use regression models a lot for my statistical analysis. I don't want to lose you on that, but basically in my dissertation, I looked at where you were born, how old you are, and your education level, and how those affect your perception of risk. Now, when I put all three of those things together, they account for, man, I'm going to misquote my dissertation, but I think it's something like 5% of the variance. So being born outside of this country, being a younger person, and being of low education accounts for 5% of your risk perception. So that means there's all this other stuff. So you can't just say that the number of near misses directly relates to the number of fatalities, because that's not the case. There are many other factors that go in here. And in this case, what we're saying is that these really aren't related at all.
So for one of my courses, I teach students this novel method for analyzing work comp data. And the second step is to do a distribution. Do you see a similar trend than what we had with the other data? Please say yes. Yes, we do. Exactly. And so, but here I actually have a median and an average, or median and a mean if you want. Do you see the difference between the two? So if we were to use like the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, we'd say, oh, the average claim was, 23 or 4,300, but the median is 9. So we go to like OSHA pays, and we type in a cause and a state, and it says, okay, a shoulder injury is $25,000. If you look at the bottom, there's a little asterisk. It says based on NCCI data from about 2 years, from about 5 years ago. That data set includes $1 million claims and a whole shitload of zeros, right? And so I want my students to be more conservative. And am I okay to swear in front of you guys? Oh, it's on the podcast. You can bleep me if you want. I figure if I can swear in front of any group, it's the construction people. That's a compliment, by the way. So if we consider all exposures, regardless of severity, we do not have normality. We shouldn't be reporting anything. If we're only considering a subset of high severity, maybe, just maybe. But we're really only capturing a very small percent of what's really going on and opportunities to find out what we could do to make corrections. Here's the study I published. It's in Shift. Is that right? Shift. This is free. You can get it online. I downloaded 7 years of OSHA 300A data from the OSHA website. be careful. It crashes Excel every time you try to run an analysis. I had to become very patient. I had to use the university's computers. Finally figured it out. Here's the thing. See this right here? So what I have here is their data right here against the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I was trying to see how close it was to the bureaus. What is that? In 2019, there's this weird anomaly. That's like a Star Trek. A weird occurrence. Here's what happened. I was working with a grad student. We created this graph. I'm like, this is weird, wild stuff. Looked into it. There was a company in 2019 that reported that each one of their employees put in 4.2 trillion hours that year. I shit you not, people, 4.2 trillion hours per worker. I'm like, that's odd. I wonder if that happens more than we know. So then we came up with a process of elimination. First of all, this is overall. So it's total reports times by 200,000 divided by total hours. That's the way the BLS does it, right? But I feel you have to consider the unit of measure. And that is, can I compare a company to an overall, even though it's part of it? Or is it better to compare each individual company's number and take the average of that? Is it different or is it the same? A lot of you are thinking back to algebra. It's like, yeah, I think it's the same if they're squared. No, it's different. It's a completely different number. I couldn't do it initially. I had a bunch of weird zeros. So first thing we did is we went through, and any company that submitted either 0 employees or 0 hours worked, we took those out. And that was the first. Okay, I don't have the phases in here. I've got it over here. Next one was some companies were reporting that all their workers put in 10 hours a year. 10 hours a year. I want that job, as long as it pays well. So then we decided, well, what is the minimum number of hours we would want a company to have their workers on average work? And we set it at 500. That's not a good bar. We just felt that 500 hours a year for every employee, that's got to be either small or a company that doesn't do that much. So we got rid of those in the second. We also got rid of, that's what we got rid of, the zeros. Or no, I'm sorry, the really low work hours, because we calculated hours per FTE based on reporting, and then the total case and the DART incidence rate. Then we decided, let's look at the really high numbers. So we went in and we set the limit, I think, at like 2,600 hours. The student figured out if you were to put in, like 80 hours a week or 76 hours a week. He worked in construction and manufacturing, so he calculated it. We took out those, we took out the high numbers. Here's what happened. We did it for each year, and so I've got all the numbers posted here. So we removed an average of 37,000 entries per year, which was about 12%. 12% of the people who upload to the data set, their numbers don't make sense. 12%. What if your quality numbers is you failed 12% of the time? How long would you stay in business? But here's the thing. I talked to the heads of OSHA. I said, what's going on with this? They said, we don't have any money to monitor this. We expect you guys to figure this out. So that's what I'm doing. They should have something in place to track when people upload if it makes sense. Here's the other thing. We removed a huge number. On average per year, 76% of the number of employees reported. So it's a really high number. 46.72% of the hours worked. The 0% injuries reported in that weird group was only 18%. But this is interesting. Of the weird ones, the actual number of occurrences was only about 2%. So are people over-reporting? Or are they over-reporting the number of employees or the hours worked? Because the incidence rate, the hours worked, that's the denominator. You increase the denominator, you reduce the product. Uh-oh. But I don't think it's their fault. I went in and read a bunch of them, and you've got a large corporation that has, like, say, 200 sites. So what they were doing is putting in the number of workers per site, the number of hours for the entire corporation. So it really wasn't their fault. But the system itself should be catching those things. Ultimately, after we made all the corrections, the numbers got much better. And then what I did is I compared the overall calculations, the individual calculations, the mean calculations against BLS. Nothing matched. Nothing matched. I'm going to run it statistically to show, but I know nothing matched. This is a natural data set, a sample, 7 years of a sample. So we should be able to find something, right? Nothing matched. Therefore, what are we doing? That's the question. So that's something I'm efforting over the next year is to wrap this up. Do you want to say anything to? Okay, keep going. You guys believe in SIFs, right? Serious injury fatality movement. I like the idea of a reclassification, but this is the justification. That, and I dug back, and it was Fred Manuel's work in the early 2000s that really generated the idea of a SIF and its unrelatedness to minor occurrences. You guys know who Fred Manuel is? I mean, he's near the end of his career or whatever. For years, he's had an enormous bug up his ass. He hated Heinrich, and he was tossing daggers at Heinrich's work through the Professional Safety Journal. And this is one that kind of stuck. So what they did here is it's a dual y-axis. So they think that you can give them a comparison. This is the actual numbers. That is this. But does this get you excited? Right. We got to look at how things are presented too. There's a wide difference there. Another thing. What is it? 45% of the fatalities are caused by vehicular. And then you have falls, you have contact struck by, violence, and then you've got another tier which goes down to explosions and things like that. You got to look at, I mean, you have to like look and read the data to really understand what it means and not take it at face value. Now, I still think it's a great idea to have an investigation, a classification for SIFs. I see that justification, but I don't see it in the data itself. Anything to say?
So I just think it's great that you brought this new chart in here because I found myself in a situation where I had to actually recreate this chart, the one that we've all seen, and take those rates and put it in there. And I realized as I was doing it that, hold on a second, these are two completely different calculations, and that doesn't make sense to compare them against each other like this. But I'm going to recreate the chart anyway because, hey, it looks kind of sexy.
So here's the quote by Deming, and this is actually what I use sort of at the header of one of my classes. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. You got to be able to prove it. You got to be able to measure. And there are so many newer measures coming out. We're at an exciting time in this field. I'm really excited. We're questioning the use of incidence rates. I really like this new movement of thinking of measuring and studying the things that go well in order to mitigate or prevent the bad things, versus just trying to prevent the bad things. I'm excited. So let's talk about causation, correlation. I'm going to tell a story. Have you guys heard of the Hawthorne effect? Some of you, yes. So I'm going to tell the story so you kind of understand it. Of course, I'm ad-libbing as I go through. So some researchers from Harvard wanted to find out, does the lighting level in a manufacturing floor affect productivity? So they came in and they took a random sample of people, put them in another room, and then they controlled the illumination or foot candles or however you want to measure it for different shifts. And then they measured the number of phones they built. So they had it at one level, got the baseline. Lowered it, it went up. Lowered it, it went up more. They're like, that's interesting. And then they put it back up to the original thing and it went up again. We had talked about construct validity. Had nothing to do with lighting. Well, they didn't realize that the researchers were like talking to these assemblers, and it was the sort of the camaraderie or being able to have yourself heard that made them, and they felt really good about what they were doing, and that's what drove up productivity, nothing to do with lighting. So that's a lesson we learned in graduate school, that you have to understand what's really going on. And if you're going to do a study, you got to be really careful of how you affect other variables that maybe actually be a stronger contributor to what you're trying to study. Do you want to speak to this?
This is probably one of the most important things to cover, is that correlation and causation are not the same things. And I brought up that variance thing just a little bit ago. And another example I can bring up here is that one weird thing that's happening right now, or one very prominent thing, is this adoption of technology in the health and safety space, all sorts of different types of technology. And I've been specifically looking at artificial intelligence over the past few years. Now, when in my survey data, I was able to draw some correlations saying that the size of the organization it does correlate with the adoption of technology or adoption of artificial intelligence specifically. However, that variance things that comes in there, again, it accounts for, I think, 20% of the variance. So that's really not a lot. That still means that there's 80% of other things that could be affecting this factor. So I have correlation, but not causation. There are all these other things that go into that. The other thing I'll say here is to try to get to that causation, to try to actually get causation. Not only do you need to know all of the factors that could possibly go into it, you have to measure all of those things, and you also have to have a large number of measurements. So, you know, people come to me all the time and say, well, this guy did this and then this happened. And so that must have been the reason. Well, it's not it. You know, just because you hear one story, that's a little piece of qualitative information that does not tell us what causation is. But this is probably one of the most important things to cover, because we can measure correlation. To get to causation is a very daunting task. And we can get there with a lot of work and a lot of measurement and a lot of research, but most of the time, we are talking about correlation.
And just speak to some of the things that were covered this morning. So, like, she had brought up leading indicators, and people said training. Are all trainings exactly the same? Do they all provide the same knowledge, skills, and abilities that allow someone to recognize and avoid something in their work? Or, okay, everybody already agrees with me, right? So, if you're going to study that, and I teach a research methods class in the grad program, and always, I let students come up with their own topics right away, early in the class, and they want to solve the world. Like, okay, online training is going to fix all things, or I'm going to measure safety culture, and it's going to fix all things. Research is one little thing. And here's the example my mentors in grad school told me, and hopefully you guys relate to it like I did. You think of your career as, say, a painting. A research study is one brushstroke in that painting. That's all you're trying to do in a research study, one brushstroke. Everything you guys do every day is a brushstroke. It's up to you all to look back at it and see how the picture is starting to form over time. That's really what research is. It's kind of crazy, right? You don't think of it that way? And so when I hear things like training, it's like, well, what aspect of it? How does it relate? There's so many other variables within that idea or concept that it would be too big just to say training. You know, it would have to be, well, we've tried this training stuff before. This seems to be the outcome. Are we measuring the right things? Are we delivering it the right way? Are we waiting the same length of time? Are we observing behavior? What are we doing? And then can I just change one piece of it? One piece of it, and see how that is affected. That's how research works. It's not simple at all. And it's not exciting right away either. It's over time you kind of figure it out. So here's me putting together a very small sample of research to try and convince you that what seems right is not always right. Because Tim had really liked a line that I just kind of thrown out during the podcast was, may seem right, may feel right, but is it? So we have to be able to measure it. So the first one is attribution error. You guys familiar with the attribution error? We tend to blame the person most proximal to the accident, naturally. Because our brains go, if I was in that situation, now that it's 20/20 vision and all that other stuff, I would have done it this way. Therefore, they must have done it on purpose. Therefore, blame them. Similar to his theory is how if we're the ones who get hurt, we can identify multiple external factors to explain why it happened because I didn't intend to get hurt. So what's the right thing? I try to assume immediately or fight the urge, the gut, to say, well, they did it on purpose. Does anybody get hurt on purpose? No, but if given the opportunity to do the right thing, will they do the right thing? And if not, how much of it is environmental or external? How much of it is internal? There are cases in which it's so much internal, you got to get rid of that person. They're a liability at this point. But I don't think that is a very high frequency. Next is equity theory, one of my favorites. Adams' equity theory, fair day's pay for fair day's work. There were some researchers in the 80s and 90s who extrapolated that to organizational justice, which I think is really cool. Basically, going to work, am I getting compensated to the level at which I'm contributing? Are the rules and policies put in place fair to what I do versus my coworkers? And finally, when I have to interact with my supervisor, management, or coworkers, am I treated the same way as others? If any three of those factors are violated, as humans, we feel we've been treated unequitably, unjustly. We seek fairness. And what's really scary, and I don't mean to go there, but if you read the manifesto of any of these mass shooters, the manifesto is just littered with the term unfair, unfair, unfair. They justified an absolute heinous act because in their mind, it was fully justified. Now that's an extreme version of it, but now let's go to the workplace. Why is the person not really engaged? Why aren't they listening to the training? Why are they kind of lollygagging? I think it was Frederick Taylor, who had said, they call it soldiering, if anybody reads scientific management. Why? Why are they feeling that way? I've actually, because of this, adopted sort of a different approach to how I teach, and when a worker is upset, or not a worker, I always say that, a student's upset, I try to come to them and go, well, let's talk about this. I try to take ownership for things that aren't mine so they can explain to me why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and let's move forward. My natural instinct is to say, I'm right, you're wrong, figure it out. That doesn't work well, though, because are they learning? No, now they're very resistant. It's kind of what Emily had talked about a little bit. So when you approach someone, don't approach that I'm going to teach you, because that's equity theory. It's what can we do to figure out what's really going on? Human error. I mean, there's a lot of experts out there. The idea, and we just lost James Reason just a few months ago, too. He just passed away. But the idea is that people are going to commit errors. We all committed errors. We do on a daily basis. Well, we're very lucky most of the time that negative thing doesn't happen. We have to understand that every day, every single person on our job site, every person on the roadway is going to commit error. And what we have to try to do is look out for it, and hopefully they can self-correct before something bad happens, or we have to find a way to correct them. Next, safety culture. You all know it came from the Chernobyl disaster investigation. Basically, they said that management didn't care about it, workers didn't care about it, they ran the tests, nobody thought about it. Well, in 1992, that same group came out with INSEG 7. I read it again. Interestingly enough, they expanded safety culture to regulatory agencies and the society willing to accept, which I think is fantastic. What an interesting concept. So I've always, when I teach safety culture, I say it's like love. You know, how do you fall in love? I don't know, but I can feel it when I get there. I feel like safety culture in many ways is that way too. But what's interesting is now I'm very much interested in this idea that what can a regulatory, let's just say a law, or regulators do to help companies instill it. And so I'm actually doing a presentation on safety on the edge on June 13th, on basically the title is that we deserve a better record-keeping standard. Going along with some of the issues we have talked about before. Did a presentation earlier this year, and one person said, I agree with everything. What can we do about it? I'm like, interesting, you say that. I'm coming up with a presentation just for that. The last thing is the Dunning-Kruger effect. You guys heard of this? The less you know about something, the earlier you are in learning something, the more confident you are you know what you know. And then as you gain experience or additional learning, your confidence slides. And then at some point, you really kind of figure it out and you start going up again. So realize that a worker who's brand new on the site is probably going to be very confident in what they know. And it's a natural thing. So everything's a learning opportunity. So that's why I did so well in that part-time EHS job. I was constantly finding micro opportunities for micro-learning for my boss, my boss's boss, the supervisors. I was always teaching. But I was kind of teaching a very simple lesson again and again and again. And they became more knowledgeable. They thought they knew. Somebody got hurt. Well, they did it on purpose. I said, no, they did not. Let's dig deeper. I want you to go out there with me and let's ask these questions. And then they understood that they were big contributors to it. There's a reason why they didn't lock and tag out. Because supervisors had this production goal. And they yelled at the workers when they didn't get the production goal. How do I meet the production goal? I violate the lockout tag out. I don't call maintenance to fix something. I just try to work around it. Workarounds, right? And so what sort of message is that instilling? Dunning-Kruger, what it does is just allows you to approach things with a much more level head. I wish all young people knew about this, because whenever you go on a first date, that's not the person. They're faking it. How many dates do you have to go through before the person becomes real? Okay, I'm giving everybody dating advice now, so sorry about that. Anything else to add?
I do want to go through just like a little bit of an exercise here. This is going to be the interactive portion here, because this is something that I do with my students in our introductory class to safety engineering. So if you want to go to the next slide, I want to walk through some questions and have you answer. So the first question is, how do you define safety?
Sending people home in the same condition they came to work.
Sending people home in the same condition they went to work. Absence of controls, okay. Oh, come on. Presence of capacity for failure. Okay. Any others? Aren't you all safety people?
We don't really think about.
It is something. Low recordable rate. Okay, that is a definition. Consistently making the right choice. Okay.
Here's how I practice. This is what I teach. Helping workers get their job done effectively with as minimal risk as possible, and hopefully they elicit satisfaction from the work they do. I consider that safety. Because if I pursue that on a daily basis, I'm much more likely to get them home at the end of the day. But I study, or I approach it, that safety is an attribute of work. It's not something that stands all by itself. A hazard is a hazard, fine. You'll have to get work done. Safety has to be part of that. It's because it's constantly competing with it. So for me to practice safety, trying to get the worker to get their job done, one, and that speaks to operations. Second is, now I'm trying to minimize the risk, which they have to contribute to. I can't do it alone. And then if they enjoy what they're doing, I'm more likely to get sort of a more, sustainable behavioral change. There was a study done by my advisor from grad school, and one of the things he found is that a clean work environment was correlated with lower incidence rates. And I took him to task. I said, did you know out in the field they say that, well, if we clean up at the end of the day, we're going to be safer? He's like, what? That's not what we meant. What we meant is when people take pride over their work, they're more likely to keep it clean and organized. I said, that's very different. And so, again, that's where that pride or satisfaction comes from. Sorry about that.
So, I mean, one of the big things to take away here, though, is that everybody here, and this happens every time I do this with my students, if I have 100 students, which I don't, I usually have, 20 to 30, but if I have 20 to 30 students, I get 20 to 30 different definitions of safety. We still have not come to a consensus on what safety really is. And that takes us to the next question. If we don't know how to define safety, how do we measure it? How are you measuring it right now? Incident rates? Anything else? Incident rates? Leading indicators, okay. What are observations, inspections, training delivery? Are all of those part of your definition of safety? So and we talked a little bit about it earlier, but if we manage what we measure, right? And if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So if you want to improve leading indicators, if that's part of your definition of safety, you have to measure those leading indicators. So I just got an email the other day because I did some survey research a couple years ago benchmarking the structure and staffing and responsibilities of safety functions across all industries. And to no surprise, there was no kind of correlation there. We're all over the place when it comes to how we structure and staff and assign responsibilities to our environmental health and safety teams. So this email came from a lady, I guess, who had recently watched one of the recorded webinars where we presented this research. And she asked, well, do you have a number on how many safety professionals I need to have. Is it by head count? Is it by revenue? And I stopped and I said, well, that's actually not a data point that we captured. We didn't capture the number of safety professionals, but that's because we're kind of open to interpretation there. If you look at the survey data that we said, I listed a number of reasons that it possibly could be that go into how many safety head count we have. And there was a good portion of folks that said it was based on number of employees. A good number said that it was based on annual revenue. None of those actually had a strong correlation, though. There were another group of folks that said there is no reason. There is nothing I can point my finger to that says this is how we staff. And so I directed her to, try a couple of things here, because I have seen it done pretty well. There's a large enterprise organization out there that had done some work in experimenting with this, and that's the important part, is they experimented with this. They did it based off of a quantitative risk profile across all of their sites to say, these are the activities that are going on, these are the hazards that we have, these are the controls that we have in place, and this is the type of safety professional with the type of expertise that we think we need here, and how many of those people we need. And they tried it, and they've come up with some really good stuff. And I said, so maybe do that. And I know it sounds daunting, but the thing you can't do here is get stuck in analysis paralysis. We have to be curious about things. We're in a position where we have to try things. We have to try to measure safety somehow. Because we know what we have isn't necessarily working. We just went through a whole bunch of data and charts that says, hey, these incident rates aren't necessarily what we need to be looking for as far as how to improve safety in our workplace. We have to try something. We have to experiment with it. We have to be curious about it. We have to try to measure these things, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then we try something else. This is what we're trying to get to. No, absolutely, and that was my other point with responding to that email, is like, it worked for this organization. I'm not saying it's going to work for your organization, but it did work over here, so you can try that. And you're right, we do try to put things into a box. We try to measure certain factors to try to get a better picture of what's going on. So industry is, in all the survey research that I do, industry is almost always a factor that I measure. I try and I run that analysis to see if industry correlates with anything, and I will tell you almost none of the time industry will correlate with any of the things that I'm trying to measure. So to put an industry in a box, like you're saying, is kind of a dangerous concept. We are trying to do something where we come up with a whole picture and be able to try to define safety based on a certain number of factors, or try to figure out the things that we actually should be measuring to improve. But realistically, it does come down to the individual organization a lot of times, based on the work activities, based on their structure, their staffing, their culture, all of these other things. It's going to come down to that. But the problem we have is that we're not measuring those things. We're only measuring incident rates. Are we running out of time? Okay.
So the last, I don't know if you guys like quotes, but this is from Einstein. Basically, it says, if you measure the performance of a fish being able to climb a tree, you're not going to get there. The idea is we want you to learn to observe without bias, seek to understand, and test your theories. Like to your question or whatever, I'm approaching it from the individual. That's my unit, is the individual versus a company versus a program. And it doesn't always work everywhere. It's all a learning process. That's what it's all about, is being a learning process. Matt and I really thank you guys for coming here. We're always on LinkedIn if you guys want to connect with us there. I'm trying to get into a little more of the electronic fighting that goes on, the discussions, but I'm still trying to be nice about it. But we do appreciate your guys' time today.
And please, if you are interested in more research that's going on in the safety world, I've had a number of total worker health researchers on my podcast that have brought up some really interesting conversations around even mental health and all of these other factors that are playing into workplace health and safety. So it's called Prove It To Me. Please follow it wherever you get your podcasts. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.